appreciate it. My name is Kevin, and I'm involved with the Young Greens here at McGill, which is, as you probably assumed, the Green Party chapter at McGill Campus Club. It's actually our first year at the club, so it's really awesome to get a turnout, and it's a really good year to get started because we had the campaign, obviously for the 2019 election, and now the Green Party leader stepped down. We're now about to launch the campaign for the next leader, which is a super exciting opportunity for us as a party and for everyone around Canada to kind of hear new voices on kind of the green future. So I won't talk too long. I'm not that exciting. I just dress well. We have 3 candidates here. We have candidates or future candidates. We have David Merner, Dimitri, and Dylan Perceval-Maxwell. I figured I would let them introduce themselves first, and then our kind of plan was after that we have some questions formed, but more importantly, we hope that the audience has some questions that they want to ask, and we kind of do a little bit of both, kind of questions back and forth, give them a chance to their own answers, maybe talk about it with each other for a while. So we want to start to introduce yourselves quickly? In any order, I guess.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Kevin. It's really great to be here. It's great to see so many people here. I'll just do a very short introduction, but first I'd like to ask anybody who ran as a candidate, just raise your hand so everybody can say, you guys rock. Anybody who's run for the Greens, you ran for the Greens too. And, yeah, it's not easy to run as a candidate, and we are really looking for young people to run. I was at Carleton University's club. They had 2 people who ran, University of Ottawa as well last week, and getting young people in the race, and especially young people in winnable ridings, I think should be a priority for us. And I really salute all the candidates who have run before, because it's not an easy thing to do. I know I ran in Esquimalt Saint-Soup. I came second, that's on Vancouver Island, came second to a very good NDP candidate, an incumbent who had been there for 3 terms, Randall Garrison. And it was a great lesson in campaigning. The NDP came out with some really negative attack-style campaign ads in the last couple of weeks, and we learned a communications lesson around that on how to respond. We responded too slowly, and we won't do that again next time. What I'm campaigning on is the concept of the big green tent, is that we need to welcome people into our party from wherever they are, whether they're conservation conservatives, whether they're NDP who are disappointed with the NDP not delivering on promises, which is a big issue in BC, whether they're liberals like me. I was a long-time federal liberal. I did everything there was to do in the Liberal Party, from knocking on doors. I was on their national council for a couple of years, and was so disappointed by Justin Trudeau breaking his promises basically from the 2015 election campaign that I left and joined the Greens. And we also need to look at, I think, at the political spectrum in a new way, get away from seeing this as a left-right divide, but saying, what are our key policies? What do we really believe in? And you'll hear from the other candidates that we are a progressive party. We really want to push the progressive boundaries, and I think we do. I think we were way more progressive than the NDP in the last campaign. They didn't campaign on guaranteed livable income. They didn't campaign on free tuition. We did. And there was a lot of overlap too, like National Pharmacare. We started campaigning on National Pharmacare way before the NDP, and basic dental, that was another key platform plank for us. We campaigned on that way before the NDP did. And it's nice to see them joining us. Especially nice to see them joining us on the Green New Deal, right? But the truth is, if you look at NDP governments around Canada, especially our current government in British Columbia with John Horgan, they say one thing systematically and do another. They put $6.6 billion into the fossil fuel industry, mainly multinational fossil fuel companies that aren't based in Canada, to develop liquid natural gas. They're logging more old growth forests on Vancouver Island right now than even the Liberals, who are really conservatives in BC, have done. So the NDP record in BC is really great for the Greens because there's lots to criticize. And the NDP in BC, and same with Rachel Notley in Alberta, have really been pipeliners. And most people across the country don't know that, but it is shocking and true. So I think what we offer is a very progressive alternative. But I also like the fact that we can appeal all around the political spectrum. We're not tied down with any ideology. You'll hear in this race from other candidates that they're campaigning on eco-socialism. And what I'm saying is, let's not tie ourselves down. Let's say we're progressives. We are very progressive. But we also appeal to, say, conservatives on fiscal conservatism, right? So we say, we'll balance the budget in 5 years too. We're going to increase taxes to make that happen. And we're going to have a very, very progressive platform, but we're also fiscally responsible because we don't want to pass on huge debt to future generations to pay off. So that's where I'm at. I'm really looking forward to your questions, both on the screen and from all of you. And I'll turn it over to whoever wants to speak next.
Sorry, I tend to feel more comfortable standing up. Dimitri Lascaris is my name. First of all, thank you very much for your patience. I'm sorry I was late this evening. I haven't actually formally launched my campaign. I'm going to be doing that tomorrow, and that's part of the reason why I was late tonight. My apologies. I want to also honor the candidates, people who run. You know, I once had a private conversation with a couple of people in the Liberal Brain Trust whom I won't name, and they said to me, you know, we don't understand why you are running for the Green Party. I mean, we just don't get it. And I said, well, why are you supporters of the Liberals? And they said, because we win. And they said, so what's your reason for running for the Green Party? I said, because its values align with mine. Ultimately, I think that that's really what defines the difference between a Liberal and a Green. A Green runs on principle and not on political ambition, whereas, you know, at least within the leadership of the Green Party of Canada, or the Liberal Party of Canada, there seems to be an overarching desire to acquire and retain power. I noticed that my good friend David, who thank you for organizing this event, you know, talked about the NDP quite a bit, and I am as disappointed in the NDP leadership as anyone. I think that the NDP leadership, both at the federal and provincial level, has abandoned the progressive movement and makes a really good show of being the faux progressives. But the real problem in this country, the real faux progressives, the ones who have taken us off the rails more than anybody else, are the Liberals. And that's where we should be, you know, focusing our critique. They're the ones who've held power. They're the ones who've traded power with the Conservatives in the entire post-World War II period, pretending to actually offer a different program when in fact the differences between them are marginal. I think what we should be doing it is in fact trying to create a big tent, but what I want to create is a big tent of progressivism. I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to persuade people who are sympathetic to the likes of Andrew Scheer or Stephen Harper or Jason Kenney to try to come over to the Greens, because I think fundamentally they are the ideologues. It's not me, it's not the progressives who are ideologues. We just want to do things that are necessary for the salvation of our planet and for the creation of a socially just society. So I too have a concept of a big tent, but it's a very different concept. It's a concept of a progressive big tent. And I think there's a left wing of the Liberal Party that's hungering for leadership. I think that the NDP grassroots is hungering for leadership. And I know that the Green Party wants to even move more decisively in the direction of a progressive agenda. So that's my idea of a big tent. I agree we should be talking about policies. We shouldn't be talking about labels. That's not particularly productive. But I will tell you, and I don't shy from saying so, that I am an eco-socialist. I embrace that term, and I'm not at all embarrassed to say so. But I want to talk about policies, and I think that's what we should be talking about tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Dylan Perceval-Maxwell. I've run for the Green Party 7 times. Before that, my first campaign, I campaigned for my brother in St. Henry for the Provincial Party, and I put in 2 days' work. He put in 2 days' work, and this woman, Graciela, put in 2 days' work, and we got 1,000 votes. The Liberals got 10,500, and the PQ got 10,000. So, you know, the PQ saw, hey, we would have won this, right? If they got half of our votes. And that's when I realized, well, this is a very effective way to make change. Because, you know, obviously we can do things ourselves, and that's one of the things I want to focus on is ways we can make a difference ourselves. But it's obviously easier if the infrastructure is there. We need government for that. And unfortunately, you know, the things that most politicians care most about is votes and money. And we can take those votes, and that makes them do green things. The other reason I'm involved in green politics is I want our ideas to be stolen. And I don't think we should. I'm very impressed with Elizabeth May. She has a non-confrontational way of doing things. She worked with Stephen Dion, and that's another thing I'd like to focus on. Stephen Dion, he ran under the green shift, tax shift. And I mean, he's not very charismatic, and that's the main reason he didn't win. But the idea of a tax shift is very important, and I think we should, you know, focus on getting rid of income tax for people, you know, making under a certain amount, 40,000 or whatever. I don't think he did a very good job in explaining things. It has to be simple. The tax system we have now is very unfair. I don't have to pay tax on my first $60,000 of income because I'm rich.
You know, they put in income tax to be progressive, but there's so many loopholes that it does the exact opposite. For example, if you want to give $400 to the Green Party, do you get any money back in your taxes? No. Why? Because you're poor. I mean, maybe, depending, I don't know your individual tax situations. But you know, you get, for the first $400 you get $300 back. But that's only if you make enough money to get taxed, and usually only the very rich gives that. So the people who are paying small taxes, make small incomes, they're actually subsidizing the political whims of the rich. And so one of the things I would do is I would give that back. Now we're not allowed to just give money back out, but we can give out gifts. So we can say, okay, you know, we got this much money back. Come pick up your gift. To a way to give that back to the people, because I think it's corrupt. I mean, we have to, you know, go to a gunfight with a gun. We can't just refuse it offhand, but we can offer it back. On that note, we're allowed to give gifts. I have little sprouting containers with sprouts here. I bought like 6. I can give out to people, or check the laws. You're allowed to do that. And you know, that's something. When you buy, let's say, lettuce, it's usually imported from California. That's a lot of pollution. If you have those, you know, it costs 20 cents for me to give this out. And then hopefully people will start using it every day, and that's a lot of less pollution. And people like getting a gift. You know, if we actually go around, the way I live in Outremont, though I usually ran in Laurier. When Thomas McClare won, he went around, they went around to every house in the whole district, and that's what we have to do. And if we do that in certain ridings, focus on the ridings we can actually win, don't run against good candidates. I think we should have, you know, there should be an option in every riding for none of the above for our candidacy. Let's say we're running against Stephen Guilbeault. You know, there should be an option for the people in the riding to say, we don't want to have a candidate against Stephen Guilbeault. We want him to win. Now, if people vote against that, that's fine. And that's another, voting real democracy is another thing I really want to stress. This is no longer, you know, the 12th century. We don't, you know, we still run on the old representative democracy like we don't have the internet. You know, for every bill that passes, if I got elected in a riding, I would post every bill that goes in the House of Commons, and people could vote whether they want that bill or not. You know, you could even have a little question to make sure they read it, and I wouldn't necessarily commit myself to vote 100%, but there would be a political commitment for me to vote for what the people in the riding want. And I would feel it's my responsibility to lead and to inspire rather than to put my will on the people. What happens when, let's say we got elected and we went too far, too fast without support of the people, then you get a backlash. In the States, particularly with Trump supporters, there's a lot of people who hate environmentalists. You see these videos of people polluting on purpose. That's because they're angry with people telling them what to do. But let's say if it's the people, if there's a vote saying, okay, we want to increase gasoline taxes, which is unlikely to happen, then the people who don't like it, they might be angry, but then be angry at everyone in general rather than those elite politicians. But the point is, we need public support, otherwise we're going to get a backlash. So basically, you know, tax system, free public transport, real democracy on my platforms, and I'm most well known for running a car in vegetable oil. I was the first person to do this in Canada, not counting some mysterious person in the 70s and 40s where it was more popular. And now when I run, one of the reasons I'm doing this is to finally get me to run a car in wood. So I'm all into biochar. Biochar is basically charcoal made for agricultural purposes. There's millions of people throughout the planet who bury this, but they don't get any credit for that. So I'm developed a system where they can get credit for that. And so I'm going to get a car that runs on wood. There's about 3 of these in Canada now. And the carbon negative. So as you drive, you're gasifying this wood into fresh natural gas, and you're making biochar, carbon. So you put that carbon in the ground, it helps things grow better, and you're actually sequestering carbon out of the atmospheric cycle into the soil forever. So the more you drive, the more you slow climate change. Now I'm not saying this is everyone in the city should start driving like this, but in certain communities and remote native communities, and you know, if you have the wood around you, it makes sense. But the technology, I mean, the guy who was developed, I don't know when, it was big in the wartime, and North Korea does it. But the guy who developed the most high-tech version, which is a website, Driving Wood, you know, he's an ex-cop. he put his own time in. They haven't even been $100,000 invested in this technology. I mean, they have certain companies. There are companies who invest in this technology, but I'm saying there's obviously been no subsidies like the oil companies get. And one of the reasons I want to run is I want to put forth all these ideas and hopefully get people to do it. I want to not just get people to vote green, I want to give them the avenue and the ideas and know-how to actually make a difference. And that's how I find I make the most difference, by doing something being copied. I was the first person to have first hemp store in Quebec, first hemp food in England. And when you do something fun that makes money, everyone copies you. I went door to door in China, Vietnam, Thailand, selling cook stoves, these carbon negative, biochar producing cook stoves. More people die from breathing smoke from cooking than AIDS, malaria, and TB combined. So I went door to door in China doing this, because China, when they do something big. But I didn't make any money, so nobody really copied me. But I'm still working on that. I guess I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So we'll start with a few questions that we kind of written down, get the ball rolling, and then we'll kind of turn to the audience. Any questions they want to ask? The first one, I noticed a few guys kind of touched on that. It is there's a growing debate within the Green Party on their spot on the left-right spectrum. Under you as leader, where would the party sit on this axis? Maybe you want to answer in the same order that we started these introductions, and then you keep it to like 1 or 2 minutes per candidate.
Sounds good. The other way we've been doing it is also we rotate the first person. I'll start first, but then for the second question, we can just rotate around.
Perfect.
Third and so on. So we actually did talk about this earlier on. That's okay. I'm happy to go first. We actually already covered this question quite a bit in our introductory comments, right? What I say is we need to get away from this left-right axis, and we really need to look at an evidence-based approach to our platform. The Liberals have always said, oh, we're the evidence-based party, but it's just not true, right? The Liberals say one thing during elections and then kind of do the opposite after the election, right? And what we need to do, I think, is situate ourselves on a different axis. We say we want to bring together progressives, but we also are fiscally responsible, and we appeal to all Canadians to go from 1.1 million votes, which is what we got in 2019, to 2 million or 3 million. We need to broaden our base. We need to have a big, broad base. And to say we're going to focus on one segment of the population, the small number of eco-socialists in Canada, is really not a good political strategy in my view. We need to broaden our tent and welcome everybody in. I totally respect other perspectives on this, but I feel quite strongly that if we narrow cast too much, we're not going to grow as a party. I just came from Calgary, Regina, Winnipeg, Thunder Bay, and the idea that we would narrow the scope of who we appeal to, the idea that we would say, well, we don't care about those red Tories who are mad at Harper and Scheer. They're looking for a place to go, and we can bring them over. In my riding, I have a lot of military folks, and they're relatively conservative in Esquimalt, Saanich. There's a huge Navy base there, so I need to be able to bring those Navy folks over to vote Green. So I think it's very important for us not to get tied up into this left-right divide, but to say, what does the evidence say? What is the best policy? And any of you who read our platform in 2019, you'll see it was the best platform by far. It was the most progressive platform by far, but it was also fiscally responsible. So that's my minute. You're next.
I don't care.
I thought we were rotating like this.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'll go next.
Yeah.
I didn't touch on the subject. Yeah, well, I feel very strongly that the Greens should be straight ahead, and I think, as in what makes sense. I think we should look at every policy, whether it's left or right, and look at it on its value, on its merits. Like you look at drug policy. Well, look at Portugal. They lowered their heroin addiction from, I've heard half, I've heard 2/3. By legalizing everything. So that works. And for every issue, we should look at actually what works and not care about the left or right. And I agree also with David that if we, the NDP already have the left, and I know people who vote conservative in the past who vote for Greens, and I think that whole left and right thing is what's causing so many problems in America and Canada and everywhere. Now, most people would consider me left, most people would consider the Green Party left, but I don't. Even though I do want to see a more fair distribution of income, and I think it's ridiculous. We don't go, if we need resources, we should go where the money is. which is the rich, but to me it should be more focused on consumption taxes, because that's how you make things change.
Sorry, again, I'm going to stand up. I'm very happy that David has repeatedly referred to the concept of fiscal responsibility, because I got to be in my bonnet about this whole thing about fiscal responsibility. Before I get there, let me say that it is true that left and right, these are labels which carry with them a significant degree of ambiguity, and they can lead people astray, but they do impart some meaning, just like the label green imparts some meaning, just like the label centrist, which I think David has indicated an affection for, that also is a label, but it does impart some meaning. So we should ultimately focus on the policies that we want to advocate for, not get too hung up on labels, but they do impart meaning. And let me be very clear, I'm a leftist. I'm not going to make any bones about that, and I'm proud of being a leftist, because I think that's the humane and progressive and sustainable way forward. So I want to turn now to this whole question of fiscal responsibility. I'm not an economist by training, but in my career as a securities class actions lawyer, I spent a lot of time studying capital markets, studying budgets, studying finance. Also, I was an independent journalist with an organization, a not-for-profit organization called the Real News Network. And in that capacity, I spent a lot of time covering the austerity crisis in Greece, interviewed Yanis Varoufakis, other ministers of the Greek government, and talked to them about this whole idea of fiscal responsibility. Let's be very clear. A state is not equivalent from a fiscal perspective to a household. There are at least two distinguishing factors for a state from a household. The state has the power of taxation. A household does not. And the state has the power to create money. A household does not. And those are not the only distinguishing factors. So this obsession which these so-called fiscal conservatives have with the balanced budget makes absolutely no sense in the context of government finance, even though it may make perfectly good sense in the context of household finance. So let me give you a concrete example of how it makes no sense. If you prioritize balancing the budget, then you're going to spend less money on this urgently needed transition to a sustainable economy and away from fossil fuels. The science is very clear that if we do not commit the resources necessary to effect that transition as rapidly as humanly possible, the costs to all of us, including the state, will ultimately be far higher. So is it make sense? Is it fiscally responsible to balance the budget when what is really required for the long-term health of our society and our economy is massive government expenditure now? That's fiscal insanity. That's fiscal irresponsibility. I'm sorry, I totally disagree with that whole idea that balancing a budget should be our priority. Our priority should be to dig ourselves out of this climate hole in which successive liberal and conservative governments and the fossil fuels industry has put us. And if that means that we have to print a lot of money and borrow a lot of money, which by the way we are currently borrowing at rock bottom interest rates, okay, our debt to GDP ratio is far lower than that of Japan and far lower than that of Italy, and both of those countries are paying rock bottom interest rates. We have far more borrowing capacity than the neoliberals in our society want us to believe. We have far more capacity to create money to fund this transition. And it is the ultimate fiscal irresponsibility to commit to a balanced budget when what we really need to do is fund a rapid transition to a sustainable economy.
I can move to the next question now. Awesome. As it's no secret, the NDP and the Liberals got the majority of the youth vote in the last election. What would be your plan to engage with the youth across the country and make the Green Party as the party of the youth vote? Start with Ray this time.
Okay, I don't know. I mean, as I said, I think we should focus on people doing things. So, giving out sprouts, going door to door, doing exciting things like running a car in wood. You can flick a button and you can have flames coming out the back. We have to get media coverage, and I don't think I could be many ways. I don't think I could be as good leader as Elizabeth May, but I might be more successful in getting in the media every day because I used to know how to do that. I mean, I've been focusing on that on a long time, but it's to get people involved, to make it to have fun, to have benefit concerts, and kids like to have fun, and you have to have it fun, and you have to get these people who don't usually vote to vote, and real democracy where we actually listen and we actually do what the people want, and where we speak in understandable terms. I mean, it's one thing talking to a university crowd But when you're talking to the mainstream, you have to keep things simple. You have to talk slower than I generally talk. And you have to give them a reason, a fun reason, and you give them some hope. Like, I'm creating this this training system, and if we get all, if we can possibly, we can turn back to have the CO2 level pre-industrial. It would cost $37 billion, $1 trillion, which is insane, but we can do it, and we got to give people hope. A lot of youth have given up, but it's like when you're going down, it's like driving in a car. Climate change is a lot like a car. You know, the more energy you put in, the faster you go. If we're going 200 kilometers an hour, you can say, oh, it's too late, we can't do anything, and maybe it is too late. But if you hit whatever you're going to hit, going 200 kilometers an hour is better than hitting it at 1,000 kilometers an hour. We have to stop slowing it down. We don't have a choice. The only other choice is death. So we have to start moving, and it's not depressing really, it's fun. Doing this is fun. And I think that's my answer, I guess, is fun.
Good call.
Yeah. So we discussed this last night at the University of Montreal, this very question: how do we motivate the youth? I have, as I explained last night, I have two kids. They're 20 and 21 years old. They're both pursuing post-secondary education, and I was discussing this very issue yesterday with my daughter Lena, who is studying international development at the University of Ottawa, because she came out of a session where a Global Affairs Canada official was talking to her class about humanitarian crises around the world, and she was feeling rather discouraged. And the conversation reminded me of the outstanding work of Naomi Klein, and particularly This Changes Everything, where I think Ms. Klein did a wonderful job of explaining that we all now understand that we need to change dramatically, and it's really just a question of how we're going to change. Okay, when people think that everything is more or less okay, whether they're right or wrong in that belief, they're resistant to change. But I think at a fundamental level, the vast majority of people in our country and around the world, and certainly everybody in this room, understands that the current status quo is absolutely unsustainable, and so they are very receptive to change. So your generation has an extraordinary opportunity to implement that change. There's more receptiveness to this. You see this in the United States with the support for the Sanders movement. Whether he'll win or not against the ferocious opposition of the Democratic establishment remains to be seen, but the fact that he's even where he is now, Bernie Sanders and his movement, in the face of that opposition, really says something about the appetite of American voters for change. And there's every bit as much appetite in this country and throughout the world for that change. This is your opportunity, your generation. Our job as the parents of this generation are to help you realize that potential. I think that's what we're here to do.
I agree. I actually see our role as structuring the Green Party so that it's extremely welcoming to youth. And that's what we did in the Esquimalt San Jesús campaign in the last campaign in 2019. We figured out how we could bring 25 young people from across Canada to participate in our campaign. We went out and we found people who would provide billets, so that meant a place to sleep and breakfast. We also filled our campaign fridges with food. People would bake cookies and bring all sorts of food in, and we promised our young Greens who came from Nova Scotia, PEI, all the way across the country to our campaign, that if they came, if they worked for our campaign, we would feed them, we'd provide part-time jobs, and we'd also give them an inspiring experience. I think the inspiration is critical. People need to feel that they're working on something that's bigger than themselves. And that's what the Green Party offers. What could be better than campaigning to save the planet? And so I think if we inspire people, if we give them the tools they need to actually come and work. We had a fantastic summer. Some people came, in fact, Kevin was one of them. Kevin came for 2 or 3 weeks, and many of them stayed 6, 7 weeks, and then a few of them even came back to campaign for the last 2 weeks of the campaign in October, skipping school. So if we can inspire people to come and work on really the most important thing facing human civilization right now, it should be easy. And look at Greta and the Friday climate strikers. We were always there on the Fridays on the front steps of the legislature in Victoria to say, we're with you. We stand in solidarity with you. Same with the Wet'suwet'en protests that are going on now. They had a shutdown government day. We went with them. I managed to campaign outside. I used to be a government lawyer in Victoria at the Ministry of Attorney General. Stood outside the door at 6:45 in the morning. Deputy Minister walked in and he said, "Hey Mark, I hope that you're going to make sure the police don't harass the Wet'suwet'en again." And he said, "Oh, David, nice to see you here." And walked in. And the kids, the other young people who were with us, were really laughing and finding that they were part of something that was actually fun. I think the point about fun and inspiration is critical. And just one last point. In the Liberals, it used to be a lot about the jobs in Ottawa. The young folks who campaigned with me when I was a Liberal, was really about what's the next step? How can I help my career? And there's a totally different feeling among the Greens. It's more about saving the planet, making a difference. And the key thing about the young Greens in my riding was they convinced their parents and their grandparents not only to vote for us, but also to come out and work. And I really do see the appeal to young Greens as the transformational potential in the next election. It's one of the reasons I asked all the young folks here who ran as candidates to put up their hands, because it's so critical to have Greens in meaningful positions where they're not just knocking on doors, but they're running as candidates, they're campaign managers. We had one of our young Greens who was a campaign manager in Hamilton. One of the young Greens who stayed with us for the summer was a candidate in Prince George, and we're trying to create the next generation of leaders. So I think that's how we mobilize young people, get them into the party, give them meaningful work, and inspire them.
Is there anyone in the audience that has a burning question they want to ask? We have more on the screen, but anyone has any they feel the urge to ask? Yeah.
So to me, I think a big part of building a strong base is allowing space for people to get involved and actually in a meaningful way. And so I guess it's a two-part question. As leader of the party, what role do you see yourself having in terms of the growth of the party, in terms of membership, youth, but also just overall membership? And what structural changes would you make, or what policies, internal policies would you put in place to kind of encourage people to participate and get involved?
I think it's my turn. I got tired of standing up, sorry. I really think this is I'm sensing from people across the country in the Green Party of Canada that they really want to see the democratization of the party. They want to see this become a much more grassroots party. I think there's a lot of frustration with the way centralized campaigns have been run. This is not to impugn any particular person. Just that frustration is there, and we're not doing a service to the party if we ignore it. So I think that we need to adopt some pretty fundamental reforms to ensure the democratization of the party. In my platform, which I'll be releasing over the next couple of months, I'm going to have a whole series of proposals, but I'll give you a preview. First of all, I think that the leader should have a constitutional obligation to advocate for the policies that have been approved by the members, and only by the policies that have been approved by the members. And the leader does not have the right to contradict those policies. The leader does not have the right to disregard those policies. The leader's ultimate role is to be a spokesperson for the membership, and that should be enshrined in the constitution of the party. I've always found it troublesome that leaders, and this is not peculiar to the Green Party of Canada, this is generalized to the pathetic political scene in this country, where these leaders have enormous power, and one of the incredible powers they have is to choose at their discretion members of the shadow cabinet, to put them in and accord to them whatever title they want, shuffle them out whenever their whims see fit. I think the members of the shadow cabinet should be elected by the members, and they should campaign, and they should persuade people, for example, why I or why David, who also served as just critic, why are we qualified to do that job? Why does the leader have unfettered discretion to make that decision? So I think ultimately we should also have a policy or a procedure in place which puts as few obstacles as possible in front of members who want to propose policies. So you see now, this is a process you're starting to see in the Green Party. It's very troublesome. It's one that's very, very pronounced in other parties, for example, the NDP, where some unnamed person, some secret committee has the ability to filter out the policy proposals that they think are troublesome or that they want to see. And I think that that's wrong. So ultimately, it's the members who should decide what policies go to the Florida Convention, what policies get debated, what policies get voted upon, and it shouldn't be some secret committee of persons whose priorities are unknown to the membership. And that's just a few things. I think there's a whole bunch of things we got to do to realize the democratization of this party. And let's not forget, it's often forgotten, that one of the 6 core values of this party is to support democracy. And I think it's time for us to recall that.
Yeah, I almost agree with everything you said there, Dimitri. I think the core values, the 6 core values of the Green Party are critical. And then how do we build on that? Like, that's our foundation. And then how can we build a structure that's solid enough to bring in people from across the political spectrum and say, this left-right stuff is old thinking. What we want to do is bring in people who believe that the climate emergency is the number one problem facing humanity, and we're going to focus on solving that problem. And we're going to leave other divisive issues as secondary, because that's a uniting issue for so many Canadians. Most Canadians actually are not climate deniers. Most Canadians understand the science. We have 8 to 10 years to go. We need to fix this now. So let's pull people together on that basis. But to make it happen, we need better structures. And I agree with almost everything that Dimitri said. I think one of the ideas that I'd love to do a little show of hands, because I am in a listening campaign here. I love the idea of co-leadership. So we don't just have one leader. They have it in Germany, New Zealand, and the UK, co-leadership. So you have a variety in the leadership. It's not just white, middle class, old guys. It's a mix of people, right? And I don't think we should define whether it's male, female, transgender, whatever. I'm not even sure we should define whether it's English, French. It may not be regional. We should leave it to the membership to figure out. But I love the idea of co-leadership. I just want a quick show of hands, yes or no. On that basis, some people say, by the way, on co-leadership, well, it's confusing, 2 leaders isn't clear for the media, who is actually the person who goes to the debates, right? How would we work that out? So some people say no. Quick show of hands, yes or no on co-leadership? Yes? No? In between? Yeah. You know what? It's interesting. This is pretty consistent. I was in Belleville 3 days ago. I'm losing track of time now in Ontario, and it was about the same. Same with the Carleton University Club. There's a lot of people interested in co-leadership. It's a green, and it shows that we're different. I think this is a core strategic advantage for the Greens, is that we are different from the old line parties, and people are sick and tired of the old line parties. They've really lost faith in the say one thing, do another, right? Say one thing during the campaign, do another when you're in government, and the co-leadership idea, to me, sort of crystallizes the difference. The Greens are different. We do things differently. We approach power differently. The points Dimitri made about democratizing the party really resonate with Greens. They don't resonate with Liberals or Conservatives that well, no, neither with the NDP. So that's where, these are some of the things that I would do to really crystallize that we're different.
Well, I agree with everything both of you guys said. I think it's great.
That's great.
And one thing which is important is there's going to be in April, there's going to be the council elections. And I met Elizabeth May last week, and she was saying that the leader has no power. I agree, it should be the people who have the power, but it's for the leader to have the power. There's some council, I don't even know who they are. It's supposedly the kind of elitist. And she was telling me to vote for her husband, John Kidder, and Kate Story. I don't know who these people, well, I know who her husband is, but I generally trust Elizabeth May. And so people who are members, I encourage you to do that. It is very important that we all get involved, and we have these new, well, not new anymore, but like the internet, it's really easy now for people to get involved and say what they want. But the policy, I've been involved for a long time, and I don't really get that involved with green policy because, I mean, it's good. It's good for us to be thinking about it, but generally it stays in those small groups, and it doesn't go anywhere, and we spend time debating, and that's a good thing. But we have to get these policies out. We have to be more, in my mind, action-oriented in actually doing things and doing fun things and setting things up so that it's easy and clear for people to actually decide, say what they want. And I agree, the leader should be saying what the people want, and they can also say what they want as well. But you need to make a difference when there is a difference, and be careful that when you are speaking for yourself, that it's clear you're speaking for yourself and not necessarily for the party.
Awesome. Is there any more questions from the audience? We had a few hands up earlier. If anyone else has any more, and you get your hand up there. Yeah.
Dear Mr. Lascaris, would you please elaborate your point on the progressive big tent? I mean, specifically what kind of progressive voters would you target in your campaigns, for example?
Sure. So I think I can best answer your question with a concrete example, and that is the taxation of the rich. It's not known to a lot of people in this country, and it should be, that for most of the, certainly for a big chunk of the post-World War II period, the top marginal tax rate in the United States and Canada was over 90%. Hardly anybody knows that. And I think right up until the 80s, the top marginal tax rate was in excess of 70% in both the United States and Canada. And of course, many people regard the United States rightly as being like the bastion of capitalism in the world. This is hardly a socialist country. And recently, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a firebrand progressive in the United States Congress, began to advocate for a 70%, not a 90%, a 70% top marginal tax rate. And they did a poll a few months ago by a reputable agency in the United States to see what kind of public support there was for this. And it turns out that 56% of American voters supported a 70% top marginal tax rate. If it's that high in the United States, it's only fair to assume that it's at least as high, if not higher, in Canada. We have a growing problem of inequality in this country. I think there's a lot of support amongst ordinary Canadians for the notion that the rich are not paying their fair share. You know, yes, were we more progressive than the NDP in the last election? Yes, but the bar that the NDP has set is very low. And the bar that the Liberals have set is even lower. So that's not really saying much. Our party did not advocate for a dramatic increase in the top marginal tax rate. That's one thing I think we should be doing. I think we should be having a conversation about capping wealth accumulation. Why do we have billionaires? Who ever came up with the idea that it's acceptable for 10 Canadians to control $65 billion of wealth, while tens of thousands of Canadians live in the streets and millions of Canadians live in poverty? We should be having a conversation about wealth caps, about eliminating the whole concept of being a billionaire. And we were not even talking about that in this country. I think that there's a lot of appetite amongst progressive Canadians for that. So if we started to put forward a bold progressive agenda, I think you'd see all of these constituencies I talked about, the grassroots of the NDP, the left wing of the Liberal Party, all those people out there who are progressive but who've given up on the political system. I know a lot of them myself. They don't even vote because they think the system is betraying them. Bring them together under one big tent, and you know what it adds up to? A majority. That's what it adds up to.
Thank you.
Just to add to a couple of these ideas, I think that I am a fan of the wealth tax as well. I think that taxing people who have over $20 million in assets is something that we should be doing. I'm also a fan of the financial transaction tax, so that when people are trading shares and so on, they're paying a transaction tax on those transactions. It's a very good way of bringing in money. You could put a very small transaction tax and bring in a lot of revenue to fund our other progressive parts of our platform, free tuition, guaranteed livable income, and so on. And third, I think that we need to really go after, in a much more systematic way, the tax evaders in the corporate sector. I used to be a tax litigation lawyer at the Department of Justice in Ottawa. One of the things that we went after is the drug companies. GlaxoSmithKline was the litigation. It went to the Federal Court of Appeal. You can look it up. And we went after them because they were transfer pricing out of their profits out of Canada and into tax havens in Bermuda and Switzerland. And there's a lot of that going on, and we're under-resourced in our federal government to go after the tax evaders. Canada is one of the only countries in the world that has people named in the Panama Papers, right? All these people who put their money offshore in Panama that hasn't gone after a single one yet. It's a real problem, and we need to strengthen our government's ability to go after tax evaders. So there are three ideas. I mean, I agree with what Dimitri was saying. This is popular. People hate it when they see wealthy corporations, massive corporations making tons of money. This was specifically on the drug ranitidine for GlaxoSmithKline, and yet they're not paying their fair share of taxes. And I think a wealth tax is something that is definitely sellable, especially if it's set at a relatively low level. It'd be hard to complain about it, and it'll bring in tons of revenue. So that's what I would do to appeal to that progressive part of the big tent we want to build.
I agree with the wealth tax and the Tobin tax, which the tax on transactions, but it's a little bit complicated for most people. But I think that I wouldn't necessarily say a bigger issue, but also a huge issue is the tax loopholes. Like I said, I don't pay tax on my first $60,000 because you're allowed to write off the value of your buildings 3% a year, like they decrease in value because you're not repairing them. Even if you do ridiculous amounts of repairs, that's not, and that's written, these laws are written because they're written by people who benefit from it. And that's one of the reasons why a wealth tax and the transaction tax makes more sense than an income tax. And I don't think income is bad, unlike, people call me progressive, why I am, but like, it's not, I'm not against people, I don't care if people make a lot of money or not. I care about what's the most efficient way to keep to keep everyone happy and to make to increase the national happiness. Not looking at GNP, but looking at national happiness, like Bhutan. And a bad tax, taxing bads rather than goods. Like, I don't think it's bad to make a lot of money. It usually is, depending how you make it. Like, if you cut hair, that's not a bad thing. If you sell nuclear reactors, then maybe it is, and so we need, and the consumption tax is much harder to, they say it's not progressive, but actually it's more progressive than the income tax we have now, because it's very hard to get rid of loopholes. It's very hard to, there's no loopholes really if it's done right, a consumption tax. And people who act green, they don't pay any tax at all. But I don't think making money is bad. I agree, in theory, they shouldn't really be any billionaires. I'm not, I don't have that much money, but I have enough. I mean, if you're green, you don't need much money, So I think we have to look at all these things, and the progressives, I think, will be with us anyway if we have a smart idea and if we're good at communicating it. I don't think progressives will leave us because we're not as progressive as the NDP. I don't think we should have that fight. I think we should look at it as what makes sense. And with the capitalist system, it makes a hell of a lot more sense than there's a lot of problems with it. It's destroying our world. But you got to keep the greed incentive there to some extent. Otherwise, you have what happened to communism. And communism never works anyway. It's never really communism anyway. It's always the people in power having the power, and that's why democratization, having the people decide what laws rather than the representatives, gives us a more progressive system, because the people are going to vote what's good for the people in whole rather than the people on top. Because right now it's the people on top which write the rules, and a lot of things everyone can agree with. Like, I used to have a store. I sold it, a hemp store. I sold it because I was sick of spending 1/5 of my time, which is the average, dealing with the government. Every day I would get a letter. When for taxes, for everybody employed, there's 9 different taxes. It all goes to the same place. It's like going into a store and paying for an apple, getting your change, and paying for the banana, then getting your change, and paying for the lettuce and getting your change. Like, for the federal government, one of them is 4 and one of them is 5. There's the income, there's the unemployment tax, there's the health care tax, and so you say, okay, I need to pay $2.50 for this tax for this employee and $6.08 for this, and then you add it together and you give it to the same person. It's insane. That was the main reason I didn't hire more people. If I could just sweep the store myself and not have to deal with that stupid paperwork. Even QuickBooks, they charge me extra $100 a month or something to do it for me, and then they made mistakes in the government, and then they quit because it was too complicated. I mean, we got to make things simple.
I'd like to respond to some things my friend said, and give you an opportunity to respond to me.
Yeah, sure.
That's
Trying to keep it under a minute or two.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for raising the subject of capitalism. I don't think I've actually said the word. Because I think it's time for us to acknowledge that the climate crisis at its core is capitalism. That's why we have a climate crisis. That's why we have grotesque and growing inequality. That's why our water systems are being contaminated. It's capitalism. There's a role for private enterprise in our society. There's a role for private property in our society. But it needs to be very strongly circumscribed by a government that's committed to the welfare of the people. When it comes to inequality, I just want to ask you a couple of questions, David. I agree with everything you said, but everything you said sounded to me like it came from the Green Party platform, a section of which was devoted to inequality. I agree with all of those policy programs, but I didn't hear you say whether or not you agree with the 70% top marginal tax rate. And when what I was talking about, certainly I agree with the wealth tax, but a wealth tax slows the rate of accumulation by wealthy persons. It doesn't cap it. My position is considerably more forceful than that. I'm saying we can impose a hard limit on wealth accumulation, and the discussion we should be having is not whether there should be a limit, but what that limit should be. And so I'd be interested to know whether you're in agreement with the idea that we should impose hard limits on wealth accumulation and a 70% or higher top marginal tax rate. And I'd very much like to hear from you on those as well.
I think the 70%, I don't have a problem with that at all. I think that that's justifiable. And you mentioned earlier, it used to be 90%. Moving in that direction, I don't have a problem with either. I also agree with what you gentlemen are saying about capitalism. It's seriously flawed. And it's one of the reasons we're in this climate emergency. But I also say that it's a huge detour to go around and say, we're going to go to eco-socialism, we're going to end this capitalist system that we've got now, and fundamentally transform it, when we have 8 to 10 years to address the climate emergency. This is a massive detour when the real urgency is in 8 to 10 years. Why take this massive detour to completely get rid of capitalism and say we're going to bring in an eco-socialist economy? It doesn't make sense to me. We have to act now, and it creates a huge distraction. It takes people's attention away from the real issue when we need to be uniting people. And I think we do agree. There should be space for the private sector, and we should recognize that in the private sector we have massive innovation, massive potential. The last 10 years of my time in government, I was a government lawyer for 28 years. The last 10 years was on deep transformational change in the justice system. And you don't know how hard it is unless you've met conservative judges and lawyers who love the system because it's designed for them. To make transformational change, we had to go to PayPal and eBay in San Francisco to say, okay, how can we online our justice system, get around these conservative judges and conservative lawyers who are making tons of money off small claims cases. You know, poor people having trouble just getting their small claims. So I'm a fan of finding our allies where we can, and we'll find them in the private sector. I've done it. And government is not the solution on all of this. I agree it's a solution on part of it, but government is not, at least the governments I've been in, federal government, Department of Justice Privy Council Office in Ottawa, and provincial government, Ministry of Attorney General of British Columbia, are not places of innovation. There's way more innovation in the private sector, so let's figure out how we bring them together. All hands on deck. And let's not say, oh, the billionaires are at fault, or let's not blame anybody. Let's say we need better tax systems, we agree on this. Let's find the places where we agree, because there are so many places where we do agree. And we also agree capitalism needs to be reformed, but let's also agree we have 8 to 10 years and we need to move now. And building an eco-socialist nirvana is not going to work. Okay.
So I'm sorry, because I'm a lawyer, I'm going to be a little bit of a cross-examiner here. I didn't hear your answer on the wealth accumulation, the limits on wealth accumulation.
I haven't thought about that enough, and I'll have to think about it. In our next debate, I'll answer that.
Thank you.
Okay?
Well, Russia is a thing example. I mean, capitalism doesn't work, yes, but I haven't seen anything else that does. I mean, Russia, they polluted incredibly. You got to look at what actually worked in society. In terms of a cap, if I have the choice, it was I think people should get a vote on it, and I would vote, if that was the only thing, if it was a cap or no cap, not looking at other possibilities, I would vote for a cap. But I think other possibilities, I think that's the wrong way to go. I think it's kind of mean-spirited. I can understand people being angry at these billionaires, but it's not that I don't want them to be billionaires. It's that I want everyone to live a good, happy life with lots of free time and good food and I wouldn't say money necessarily, but the things that money can buy. My grandparents, my granddad and my dad's side, he was a member of parliament in Northern Ireland, and they got taxed 90%. And they actually, well, I don't know if they agreed with that, but they agreed they also had a lot of their land taken away and given to the poor people at very low rate in Northern Ireland. And they, even though it hurt them, they could see that it was good. They could say, well, look, everything looks, all these houses are beginning to look better, and that's the thing, it worked, and the tax rates, but it doesn't matter. You could increase my tax rate to be 90%, but if I can still write off 3% of all the buildings I own, I don't own that many buildings, but if you got the loopholes, it doesn't matter. And maybe a cap is a way of getting rid of the loopholes, but I doubt it. These rich people, they can pay for a lot of intelligent people to find the loopholes. And if you poor, the fact is, people in my store, my employees, they were paying less tax than me. And in fact, I do pay a lot more tax than I need to, because I just at a point it's like ridiculous. I'm not going to say I make $10,000 a year.
Yes, I see a lot of hands go over the audience. I'm going to make sure we go to back there in the corner. Yes. Yes.
Actually, I wanted to respond to what David was saying just a little bit earlier. And I mean, I see that, on the surface, this argument you're making might make sense that, we have 8-10 years to save the earth. framing it is a distraction, but I don't understand because a lot of people argue, and I think they're right. I mean, Dimitri mentioned Naomi Klein. Capitalism, if it's at the heart of the problem, this sort of idea of profit, of greed, of growth, which is completely tied into the capitalist system, then, maybe it's just a necessity to actually face it straight on. And it's not actually distraction. And yes, we do have very little time, but we're just going to put some, band-aids on stuff, and it's not going to work. So I don't really fully understand the argument.
I think it is my turn to start. Should I start? Or?
Yeah, but a quick response to that, and then we have a lot of other topics you'll want to get to, so you can do a quick stay on this.
Okay, very short. So, thank you. Because your point about band-aids is exactly right. We can't apply band-aids. We need to be the party of deep transformational change. And I totally agree with that, and I think Dimitri agrees with that. I think we all agree that one of the key differences between the Greens and the other party is we have to be the party of deep transformational change. But let's focus on the policies that get us there. If we're framing things as we're going to end capitalism, or we're going to bring a new eco-social world to bear, I don't think it's going to sell with a vast majority of Canadians. Canadians are not going to buy into this vision in a way that will lead to transformational change, and we can create transformational change through very strong policies. And we talked about these policies here, new tax policies, right? Very ambitious spending policies, billions of dollars in spending. But why shoot ourselves in the foot with the wrong kind of language? Because in politics, language matters. It really matters. And if we want deep transformational change, we need to be really smart politically about how we sell this to Canadians. So I totally agree, no band-aids. I totally agree, deep transformational change. But I also say, let's be really careful how we frame it. Sorry.
I'm sorry, if we just keep it like one question per person, so we can kind of go around to everyone. I know you had a question here?
Yeah, sorry, I want to follow up on this question. David, when you say you don't want to decide on left or right, and you don't want to use more eco-socialism, etc. From a marketing perspective, I totally agree. If this is probably with the electoral system in Canada in any case, I totally agree. But what I try to understand is, when it comes down to what matters, to policy, how far are you willing to go to attract more people rather than to make policy that is green? Example, you mentioned you were running in a neighborhood of naked folks, gun registries. Are you avoiding this topic? Are you saying, big fan of guns? How far would you go to attract those people? You know what I mean? Marketing is one thing.
Yeah.
If you avoid the term eco-socialism in your campaign, that's fine. But how far are you willing to go to attract conservatives, for example?
That's a great question, because there are limits, right? We have our core green values, and the gun control issue is a perfect example. We had a Green Member of Parliament from Thunder Bay, Ontario, where guns were a really sensitive issue. A lot of ranchers, farmers, and people out there who depend on firearms. And Bruce Heyer, an NDP guy who came over to the Greens and became the second Green Member of Parliament, disagreed with Elizabeth May. Elizabeth is a strong gun control advocate, saying this is about suicide, it's about protecting women, it's about violence in the cities. And he was saying, no, it's about protecting ranchers, and they voted different ways. It wasn't one of those core issues that goes to the future of human civilization and our survival. And so a way I distinguish it is what goes to this 8 to 10 year time frame? What goes to leaving no one behind in this just transition off fossil fuels, off our old way of administering social programs, and into this new way of a just transition that is transformational, that is really a deep transformation. So on gun control, I'd say, if Bruce Heyer decides that, well, he really doesn't think, in all good conscience, it's in his constituents' interest to vote in favor of gun control, I respect that. But where I say around our core issues, 8 to 10 years, we've got to be very careful how we talk about this, because people are watching us. They're watching us across the country. And one of the reasons we got off track in the last election was we were talking about abortion, remember? We were talking about racists in New Brunswick coming over to us, remember that issue? We were talking about all sorts of issues that were not our core issues, which is, there's 8 to 10 years left, right? So I think we need to be very disciplined around is this a core issue or not? If it's not, gun control is a perfect example. I'm happy if Bruce Hire, Green Party MP, decides it's in his constituents' interest not to vote in favor of gun control. But if it's about these core issues and our core values, then I think that's where we need to rally around. And if we don't get it right, we're never going to break through to the 10 to 12 to 15 seats that we need to actually influence government. And some people say, well, that doesn't matter. We should be ideologically pure. And I say, that's not what the Green Party is about. It's about winning seats. It's about having political power in Ottawa and making a difference inside the legislature, not just on the legislature steps.
May I respond to that?
Yeah, maybe like 1 or 2 minutes and kind of go back.
Yeah, I've been talking a lot, sorry.
You know, again, when I entered this campaign, I'll be honest with you, I was prepared to come out with guns a-blazing with the eco-socialist label, but I started listening to people in the Green Party, including David, and I began to realize that what I really should be focusing on are my policies and what I prefer to promote for the party, but I'm not going to shy away from what I am, and I am an eco-socialist. Now, I actually think that what David is prescribing, having said that, and we're in agreement on that much, I think, is going to feed into the narrative that the Green Party is a one-trick pony. This idea that the 6 to 8 years is what we're all about. I think abortion is a core issue for our party. I mean, I think the reason why we got distracted in abortion is because we didn't take a sufficiently committed stance to pro-choice. That was the problem. That's why it became a distraction. That's why it cost us votes. It's not because it isn't a core issue. It absolutely is a core issue. I think gun control is a core issue. You know, one of our core values is nonviolence, for God's sakes. How can we as a party that has as a core value nonviolence allow the proliferation of weapons? I'm not going to succumb to some gun lobby and say at the end of the day, well, I don't want to piss off those voters, many of whom, by the way, support conservatives. And so I'm going to sacrifice on the core value of the party. No, I believe strongly in gun control. I think we should have a gun-free society, you know, with some very, very minor exceptions. And I'm willing to say that. And if at the end of the day it costs us some support on the right of the political spectrum, I think that's a price we have to pay, because the big tent that I'm trying to build is a progressive one.
I think we should do issue by issue, and people should vote their conscience, and say what they personally believe in. And I agree with both of them, really, both of you guys. I think if somebody wants to run, I mean, there are some core values, but I think, if we believe in democracy, we have to agree there'll be differences among us. And I think the main thing is the green, and it doesn't mean that, pro-choice is, if that's something the candidate wants to speak about, then they should be able to, make it their issue. And I don't think we lost many votes about it, because I don't think many people was like, oh, I'm not going to vote for the Green Party because they're pro-life or whatever. I mean, it was media. The media is something to talk about, but I think we have to get things done, and we got to look at what actually efficiently gets things done, and not just the environment. I do think we should talk more about other issues, because people naturally think of us as a one-issue party, and we're not.
Awesome. Go to Leanna there.
I think we can all agree that diversity and representation is an issue in Canadian politics at large, and that there's always room within the Green Party to increase diversity and representation. A number of members of marginalized groups who are either people of color or who are members of the LGBTQ community or who are differently abled do not feel that the government represents them. And so my question for you is, why have you decided to run instead of throwing your considerable support behind a qualified candidate who is a member of a marginalized group?
I get that.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, there's still time to do that. That's one of the reasons I'm running, is that I might throw my support behind somebody else at the end. But I do think people should be judged on their ability rather than just on their ethnicity or whatever. You live in Quebec, right?
Yes, I live in Montreal.
And you're not Quebecois.
No.
So in a way, I mean, it's nothing. We're white men. We have a lot of power, and, but we're also, I feel, marginalized in a way. I'm Jewish, half Jewish. But to me, I mean, nobody should vote for me for that reason. But we do have to support and make things more even, and that's why I want people to vote for the council, because the way, I don't think we should complain to the public necessarily about the whole way this leadership campaign is set up, but to have $50,000, and you know, like, it means it's harder. Like Judy Green, she's a good candidate, but she doesn't have the $10,000. What happens? We have to give $1,000 and then and 100 signatures, and then we have to give $9,000 right away. Now it's easy for me to do it because I have the money. You're only allowed to give $25,000 of your own, but it means it's giving again power to the rich rather than, and obviously minorities have less and have less capabilities for that. So we have to practice what we preach, and you know, let people campaign on their qualities, but we have to make an even playing field. And in reality, in this election, it's not an even playing field.
So the candidate to whom I believe you're referring is you know, a very qualified candidate. She is the international affairs critic in the shadow cabinet, if I understand correctly, the candidate to whom you're referring. Annemie Paul.
Yes.
Right. So right. So Annemie, I didn't know anything about Annemie before the coup in Bolivia. I'd never heard of her before. Her presence on shadow cabinet postdated my presence on shadow cabinet. I left the shadow cabinet in 2016, so I didn't have the privilege of knowing her. And you know, she made a comment, and you may recall at the outset I said that I'm just announcing my candidacy this week. I actually took a long time to think about this. I didn't rush into anything. And one of the things I wanted to do was really look at the field and see who else was entering. And when Annemie entered the race, I was intrigued. But I went back to that comment that she made, where she was, with all due respect to Annemie, I wish she was here. She could defend herself. But she basically lent legitimacy to the report of the Organization of American States, which falsely accused the Bolivian government of having perpetrated electoral fraud. I was very angry about that. What has now happened is that a bunch of anti-indigenous racists have taken over what was fundamentally a progressive government, a pro-indigenous progressive government in Bolivia. I think Annemie made a mistake, but that was not encouraging to me. And then subsequently, Annemie was making statements very similar to those that David has made about wanting to maintain the sort of centrist status of the Green Party. And despite all of that, I reached out to Annemie and I asked Annemie to meet with me, you know, so that I could get to know her better before I made a final decision. And Annemie was not available. And so ultimately I had to make a decision on the basis of what I know. And based on what I've seen, I don't think that the candidate that we need to take this party forward and move this party strongly in a progressive direction, in an anti-imperialist direction, who will be outspoken about opposing the types of things that happened in Bolivia. I don't think that candidate had entered the race up to now, and I felt an obligation to go in.
Just to clarify, I'm not proposing that we have candidates based indiscriminately just on where they exist in the original position of oppression. I'm talking about a qualified candidate whose views align with the party.
Yeah, so I think my vision, my short answer to you is that my vision, to the extent I've been able to ascertain what Annemie's vision is, my vision is very different from Annemie's, and that's why I've entered the race. The other thing I want to say is that your question is really important because I don't know how many people know this, but the National Observer did a poll of the political parties in the election to determine whose candidates were the most diverse group, and the Green Party was dead last, even behind the People's Party of Canada. So your concern should be a top priority of our wins this race.
Because it's how to get people to run, I guess.
We're not doing a good job of attracting diverse candidates, that's for damn sure.
Yeah, I really agree with that last point, and what we need is a transformation inside the Green Party, and to get that, we need people who really understand deep transformational change in organizations, in complex organizations. And I wouldn't be running if I didn't believe that I was the best person for it. In fact, it's going to sound a little bit arrogant, but I don't think there's anybody else in the whole race. In fact, I know there's nobody else in the whole race who has 36 years of experience in working inside political parties. And the Liberals had some very good structures they had a multicultural, what they called a multicultural commission, they had a women's commission, they had a seniors commission, and they had a youth commission. And they had feeder systems to feed people into positions of authority and power inside, and that's how they've become one of the best parties with the NDP at diversity internally. And we need the same thing inside the Green Party. We need much better structures, and we need discipline around moving people into leadership positions so they're ready to go. And so there are a couple of people. Annemie Paul is a black woman in Toronto, and Amita Kuttner, and their papers are at the back, by the way. I'm signing up people for all their campaigns. And Amita is a 27-year-old, PhD in astrophysics, ran for us in Burnaby. She ran in Sven Robinson's riding, a Liberal won it. But we need these young leaders to be put into a position of power where they're fully equipped to take on leadership and they're able to succeed. And what I see time, and it happened in my riding, I went to 2 or 3 women in my riding as Esquimalt-Saint-Chou who would have been better than me. The mayor of Souk would have been better than me. The previous candidate, Francis Lippman, would have been better than me. And I went and said, look, I will be your campaign manager, your door knocker, whatever you want. I'm going to work for you. I said this to Elizabeth May too. None of them wanted to do it. Frances is a very good example. A woman who ran before me, she said, I was so burned by this experience, so exhausted by this experience. My photography business was on the rocks. I've only now rebuilt it 4 years later. And she said, I'd never do it again. And what we need to do in our party is structure things so our candidates don't go through that experience, and our candidates feel supported every step of the way, and that people of color or people from other diversity communities that are seriously underrepresented in our party are properly supported, and they're not supported. But to do it, it takes systems, it takes organizational skills, and I have those skills. I've done it in the Liberal Party, on their National Council. I know how we can do it in the Green Party as well. I did it in my riding campaign. Pretty much all women campaign manager was a Chinese Canadian who was a very strong leader, and this is how we build. The youth campaign was part of that. Very strong youth who went on, as I said earlier, to lead elsewhere. We need to build leaders, and I'm committed. If I become a leader, I don't see myself staying in here forever. What I want to do is build the next level of leadership so that, you know, in 4, 6, 8 years, I'm out of here and we have 5 or 6 people from diversity communities who could really lead the country running for the Greens. That's what my vision of leadership is, building for the next generation. I think it's an excellent question.
Any more questions, any more hands? Sam, come over there.
Yeah, how do you feel about the federal government confronting provinces, particularly on issues like Bill 21 or resource exploitation? How would you sort of change the way the federal government currently interacts with provinces on these issues?
I've lost track. Who's the first one on that one? Why don't I take a shot at that? Because I have worked in the federal government and the provincial government, and I do see it as important to respect the other level of government's jurisdiction. But there are some issues, and I think Dimitri said it well. There are issues that relate to human rights, minority rights. Abortion is a good example. Religious rights are another good example, where I think that both levels of government and leaders in both levels of government should say where they stand on the issues and what their concerns are. And we should be standing as Greens, we stand for human rights. And these are core values, and so we should be saying we stand for it. We should also respect, though, and la loi sur la laïcité is a very good example, that we should recognize that, yeah, in Quebec, there's a different history than in the rest of Canada, and that history we need to respect, right?
Would you be willing to legally confront the provinces as a federal party?
What do you mean by legally confront? One way to legally confront is actually to argue, say that loi sur la laïcité gets to the Supreme Court of Canada. Does the federal government intervene? Does the Attorney General of Canada stand up and say, this is the position of the government of Canada? And I think we should. I think that's an example where there is a national interest. Freedom of religion, the rights of minorities, equality rights of women. These are places where the Attorney General should stand up in the Supreme Court and say, here's our view on this issue to help inform the court in its decision making. So the answer on that one is yes.
I would say it depends on the issue, and I think we should stand up and for what's right. I mean, I feel very strongly against Bill 21, but I also believe in democracy, and if you don't let people do what they want, like I'm against Bill 101 theoretically, but in reality, I'm glad it happened because people feel less threatened and there's more peace on the street, and there's certain parts of it which make more sense than other parts of it. Like I think that French kids should be, you should allow to send your kids to English school if you're French. It's a disadvantage to the French population if they're not as good in French, if they want to be president of Alcan or whatever, they have to speak English, right? So It depends on the situation, but I don't think we should be shy in standing up for what we believe in. But we also got to give people the freedom. They should do it out of their own. We shouldn't have Bill 21 because people don't want Bill 21, for example. You know,
Actually, it has a lot of support in the community.
it has a lot of support, but we have to try to get rid of that support. We have to talk about it.
I mean, I'm not for it either, but I'm shocked how much support it has.
I know, I'm shocked too. But we shouldn't shy away from the issue. We should talk about it a lot, and we shouldn't be worried about losing votes about it, because I think a lot of it is soft support, and we have to make people feel at peace. It's like immigration. I'm for immigration, but we have to have the majority of the people also be for immigration. If everyone is against immigration, and we have it, and we increase immigration, then there's going to be more violence on the streets and more racism. So we have to inspire and lead. It doesn't mean we shouldn't go to court and we should go to court and make our case in court against it. But it also, you know, not every situation is the same as Bill 21.
I agree that you have to look at the particular context and decide as a federal government how to approach the relationship with the provinces. But I could say I want to talk specifically about Bill 21 and articulate a few general principles before I do that. The one is that I believe in decentralization and local governance to the greatest possible degree. And so I think that the federal government should try to impose its will on the provinces only in unusually urgent circumstances. I would say that charter rights are non-negotiable. That's one of the circumstances. Another circumstance is, for example, with a climate emergency. This is a matter that affects us all. And if the federal government has to impose its will, then that's what's got to be done in order to save this country and this planet. But as a general matter, we should try to defer as much as possible to local decision making. When it comes to Bill 21, you're going to hear something from me which you don't hear very often from political candidates. I'm going to tell you straight up, I'm an atheist. I've been an atheist my entire adult life. And as an atheist, no one cares more about the separation of religion and state than I do. I'm very sympathetic to this whole idea of guaranteeing the secularism of the state. I understand why there's broad-based support in this province. I worked in France long before this law was adopted. A very similar law was adopted in France back in the 90s, I believe, and I was there at the time. And that was the dialogue. It was around, maintaining the secularism of the state, and that's a very valid concern, but I also believe equally as strongly in freedom of conscience and religion. And this law is the wrong way to go about ensuring the secularism of the state. The fact that people go into the workplace wearing the religious symbols that reflect their own personal faith doesn't in any way, shape, or form amount to the imposition by the state on the populace of a religious belief. In fact, it reflects the wonderful religious diversity of our society, that you see people in the public sector, wearing the hijab, wearing a cross, wearing skull cap, wearing whatever religious symbols, the Sikh religious symbols, whatever it may be. I think that is a reflection of the pluralism of our society. We should celebrate it, and what we really need to do is engage Quebecers in a conversation about what is the best way. What is really the best way to ensure the secularism of the state? We understand your concern. It's a very legitimate concern, but there are better ways to do it than that.
That's a beautiful answer.
If you lived here, you would.
Any more questions? Sorry, you guys over the back, your hands up the whole time. Yeah.
I wish I'd said that. That's so good.
My experience, some of my concerns for the environment is that the left think it's all about being on the left. Like the left, the only ones that care about the environment. And then when I was campaigning and knocking on doors, maybe people who aren't from the left and whom the environment's super important, and they're not climate deniers. And they're like, what the hell are you Green Party people doing, putting a third of your budget in free education if you think there's a climate emergency? So I'm gonna ask you guys, are you gonna put a third of our goddamn budget in free education when there's a climate emergency and other measures like that that have really no demonstrable impact short term on climate control and climate transition? Or are you gonna keep on spending money for the left and scaring away at least half the electorate?
It's my turn?
Maybe
Or you want to go first if you like, whatever you prefer.
My answer is no. And I think there should be more subsidies for poor people to go to school, but I don't think the rich people should get free education if they can afford it. My dad was dean here, and he had to deal with the lack of funding, and often the free education, the law they had here to keep education prices down, that was great, but it also meant that it's very hard to give a good education. And I do think we have to focus on the climate crisis, and I do believe we have to be a big tent and bring everyone in. And I mean, you look at what works. They do have free education in a lot of countries, and that's great, and I'm not against it either, as long as it's done right. But I don't think it should be a major focus for our party, though I'm sure it helps get some of the youth vote. And we have to look where the money comes from and what else the money could be used for. But I don't think there's a blanket. You'd have to look. I'm not a specialist, but you would have to look at what template you're using. It could make sense depending if you look at Denmark or one particular country. But I think you're right. If that could turn a lot of people off, and we have to bring everyone in. As it is now, I mean, maybe Alberta will separate, and well, I don't think they will, but we want those people. We don't want those people to be anti-environmentalists, and we want to be reasonable. And I think we can have radical ideas like that, though those ideas aren't even radical in many places. But I think we can make those moves slowly. Like, I think we should get rid of income tax for anybody under $50,000. We don't have to do it first day. You do it a little bit. You see, there could be repercussions for whatever move we make. There could be repercussions, and we have to admit that we're not infallible and become flexible and remain flexible.
My experience, I think, in canvassing was a little bit different than yours. I certainly encountered, a significant percentage of voters who talked that way, thought that way. My experience wasn't, and this is anecdotal, and I'm not suggesting that this is some kind of scientific sample, it isn't. But most people I met were not concerned about free tuition. They readily embraced it, and readily embraced the idea of, unburdening our indebted graduates from these very significant student loan debts that they come out of university with, and which force them, by the way, to do jobs which aren't necessarily reflective of the people they want to be. It's just they're high-paying jobs that will pay off the debt in a reasonable amount of time and not run them debt slaves. So I found that most people that I dealt with were concerned about that. But let's talk about the ones that you encountered who expressed this view. I think they're vastly underestimating the spending power of the state. And this goes back to something I said earlier. Okay, the state has the power to tax, and the state has the power to generate currency. And it has used the power to generate currency very liberally when it came to bailing out corporations. It's amazing how much money the world's central banks were able to come up with out of thin air, trillions of dollars to bail out the world banking system in the financial crisis. And yet somehow they don't have the money to help us fund a transition to a renewable economy when we're confronted by an existential climate crisis. There's a lot of spending capacity there. The Bank of Canada can help. Furthermore, we can tax, we can cause and force the rich to pay their fair share. Number three, and this is something that the Green Party didn't do as far as I know in the last election, we should advocate for a dramatic reduction in defense spending. We're spending way too much money on the military. Number four, we're subsidizing fossil fuels, billions of dollars a year. And that's not including Trans Mountain. The obscene sums that are being spent on that planet-wrecking pipeline. There are huge sums of untapped resources out there, which we can use to do both what you want to do and what those voters wanted to do, which is to give the young people of our country free education, let them graduate without debt, and solve the climate crisis. It's eminently doable.
I agree that it's doable, and the key question is how do we make the case to the farmer you're talking to is saying, this looks like an imbalance. I was born in Alberta. I live in British Columbia now, and I have family who, I have a cousin, for example, who's a welder in Fort McMurray, and he would actually love to transition out of his welding job, but he has 3 kids and he needs some money. If we were able to say to him, look, we can help you develop the skills to go into geothermal or solar or wind, you have skills that are transferable, and we'll help you get there through free tuition and trade school, Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. And it's the same on the doorsteps with, you know, people in agricultural communities, blue collar workers. I think people need to hear, what is the money for? How's it going to benefit our economy? And I think it'll have a huge impact on our economy. Look at Norway, you know, Switzerland, Germany. These are knowledge-based economies. They're very successful. They all have free tuition because they recognize that you're investing in human capital, and the investment pays off many times over. And it'll help the farmer who's worried now, we're going to spend so much on education. It'll come back to our society, and it's an investment in the long term. It's a hard pitch to make because it's not short term. It's not going to happen in 2 years, 4 years. It's going to take 10, 12 to pay off. But we can see from these other economies that it really does pay off. And especially in the context of what's happening overall in our economy with artificial intelligence and machine learning and massive changes in the industrial economy changing into a rapidly changing knowledge economy, we need to get our young people there. We need mid-career people like my cousin to be able to move on off the fossil fuel industries and into the renewables. So I think there is a pitch we can make. I agree, it looks like a lot of money, but we have to be able to make the pitch on the return on that investment. It's an investment in human capital, as Dimitri was saying, way better than investing in fossil fuel infrastructure, way better than wasting taxpayer funds like the current government has been doing. And that also, I think, appeals to the sort of the farmer who's saying, government's just waste our money. We got to say, no, we've thought this through. It's a pitch we're making because we really believe in it, and there's evidence that it works. It works in these other economies. So that's what I'd say, but I can see you're not convinced.
No economist that looked at our platform agree with what you guys are saying.
Yeah, well, that's one of the
Sorry, but like, you know, like in Europe, and Europe this exists. No offense, but I'm from Austria. We have free kindergarten, we have free university, we have free school. We're one of the richest countries in the world. Sorry, but like, it works.
You don't have to apologize. I'm saying during the election, all sorts of economists looked at our numbers, right? So, like, I understand what Europe is, and I understand English. I'm just saying during the campaign, people looked at the platform we were proposing, and it was over a third of our budget was for these measures that are controversial, and no economist in the country, including the one, what was the guy that looked at our budget?
At the University of Ottawa, the parliamentary budget officer guy.
Nobody looked at our platform and said the numbers added up. Nobody.
Can I ask you, when you say, first of all, it's important to understand that the economist profession, there's a great deal to be decided.
It's like a legal profession.
Exactly. That's a whole other discussion. But, you know, when you say the numbers don't add up, were they saying that doesn't result in a balanced budget? Because if that's what they were saying, I would say, so what? You know, we don't need to balance our budget, number one. And number two, were they taking into account that there are alternative resources of funding that weren't incorporated into our budget? And if they weren't, if their narrow task was just to figure out whether the spending proposals and the taxing proposals we put forward would end up in a balanced budget, I'm not necessarily going to contest their conclusion. What I would contest is whether or not we should be looking at a balanced budget, number one, and number two, whether we should be looking outside of our budgetary sources of revenue and looking at other sources of revenue, like increasing taxes on the rich dramatically.
But there's another issue which he brings up, is that people who haven't gone to university go, I know people who are like, I'm successful, I didn't go to university, why should we be giving free university? Why should we be subsidizing people in geography? You know, this is how people feel. And this is not the people in this room. But we have to listen to this, and we have to bring the people on board.
It takes some leadership, and this is one of the places where we actually do disagree, which is around this question of so what. I think it's really important to be able to explain it, to say here is how our numbers add up, here is why this investment is a wise investment. We need to be able to explain it, and you're right. We did not do well with the economists, and the Parliamentary Budget Office said that our assumptions around revenues were unsound. We can't do that again. You know, the real progressives like Alan Blakeney in Saskatchewan, you know, with the NDP, were really careful about being sound on their budgeting and being credible, so that the farmer in Saskatchewan would say, okay, you know, these NDP folks aren't crazy. We need to do the same thing as Greens. People hold us to a higher standard. And I think proper budgeting and having a real fiscal plan is critical to our credibility, especially if we want to break through in the next election. So I totally agree with the point that it's a serious problem. I do think we need to show leadership, but we must make sure our numbers add up. I think it's critical.
Yes, we have about like 10 minutes left. So can I see by show of hands how many more questions we have left? I'll try and do a little bit of, maybe you can try and dig out really like fast kind of speed round to answer each question. So kind of try and keep the answers kind of shorter so we can try and get through all like 3 or 4 in the next 10 minutes. Yeah, sorry, in the front round.
Cool, thanks. Sorry, I just have to leave, so I want to make it as quick as possible. In terms, so we talked a lot about revenue generation. Now I'm happy that we're moving a bit towards spending. In terms of, I guess, your different visions for a kind of an eco-socialist approach and a fiscal conservative more approach, how would you see support for community groups? So I ran in the provincial election for the Green Party, and one thing that I really retained was that, number one, to have healthy communities, you have to have strong community groups who deal with issues of poverty, seniors isolation, really on the ground issues that affect day-to-day lives of residents. And these community organizations and nonprofits are dependent on subsidies from both provincial and the federal government. So I guess, Dimitri, your vision, how would you see the support of these institutions? And then I guess, David, how do you square the fiscal conservative side with the need to kind of increase spending for those kind of programs or grants available for those associations?
I'm happy to go first. So I reject the idea of fiscal conservatism. It's terrible, terrible optics, it's terrible communication, and it's not what the Green Party is. We're saying we're going to jack up spending. This was the last question where people are saying it's outrageous how much we're going to spend on free tuition, on guaranteed livable income, and all the national pharmacare and the guaranteed dental. It's not a fiscally conservative platform. We are progressives, and we're campaigning on a very, very progressive platform. But we have to say, yes, we're going to spend a lot more money, but we also have a plan on how to make it sustainable. So we're not loading up debt onto future generations. And I agree, actually, with Dimitri's analysis. There's a lot of room here. Interest rates are so low. We can run up the spending. We can, but we can spend a lot more on frontline services. Totally agree. National homeless strategy. The Liberals had wonderful words. No money. We need to do the opposite. We need to say we're going to be careful and responsible, but we're going to pour money into the homelessness problem, right? And say, and here's how we're going to get back to balanced budgets eventually. So it's not loaded up on the shoulders of young people paying off these debts in 20, 30 years from now, right? So I think we need both. We need to be able to say, we are socially progressive. We have clear, strong plans on all these issues I've just listed, but we're also fiscally responsible. I think fiscally responsible is what people need to hear to start coming over to us. Otherwise, we'll have the problem that was referred to earlier, is people just won't believe us and they won't give us their vote.
See, I think we need, here, you and I, this may be the biggest point of this.
Okay, we found it. Yeah.
Whereas you want to preach fiscal responsibility, I want to question the basic concept of fiscal responsibility and cause people to think about what fiscal responsibility actually means. Is it fiscally responsible to leave tens of thousands of Canadians living in the streets? How's that fiscally responsible? There are social costs, costs to the healthcare system, costs to policing, which add up to untold amounts of money. You know, is it fiscally responsible to balance the budget when you're confronted by an existential climate crisis, an economy-wrecking climate crisis, and the costs of which are going to be much higher in the future than if we try to deal with it now? This is not fiscal responsibility. You know, in this country, we have, the last time I checked, we had a debt to GDP ratio around 80%. In Japan, it's over 200% the last time I checked, and they're paying virtually no interest on their debt. We have huge amounts of fiscal space to spend. The other economic principle that's often forgotten is that when you give money to people who need it, people who are poor, they spend the money. They have to spend the money. They have to spend the money on clothing. They have to spend the money on feeding their kids, on accommodation. When you give money to the poor by subsidizing businesses and by cutting taxes on the rich, they just keep it. It doesn't stimulate the economy in any way, shape, or form. So there are economic benefits to supporting the poor and the homeless. One thing I would do for sure is I would declare the right to a home to be a human right. I believe that should be a constitutional right. The government should invest massively to ensure that every single Canadian has decent housing. That in and of itself is going to have massively positive effects, not just for the economy, but for local communities. And I would ensure that people have a living wage. I think the minimum wage in this country should be $20 at least. That's not some pie in the sky number. If you look at what it costs to live in a city like Montreal and Toronto nowadays, $20 an hour means a lot of money. You know, the kind of money that people are being paid minimum wage today is pathetic. And if we start giving people a living wage, that too will stimulate the economy. Nobody in this country should be living in poverty. And we should make sure that people have, whatever it takes, whether it's a jobs guarantee, whether it's a guaranteed minimum income, every single Canadian should be able to have a decent life and should have a home over, a roof over his or her head.
I agree that when you give money to the poor, it gets recycled right away. And if we did massive, building of ecological housing, well, that stirs the economy. It's not like this money just disappears. It gets recycled, which is what you want. And, according to economics, you want money to be moving fast. And if they don't, people on welfare, every cent they have goes into their community that month. It makes a lot of economic sense. And but you have to look at every expenditure on an expenditure basis. And we're doing we have a massive debt to the environment. We're taking out, it's like a bank, we just keep on taking out, resources and putting in the atmosphere, not taking anything back. So, we have to be aware of that, and to me that's the bigger issue. But I think we should generally say that we want to be fiscally responsible. It doesn't mean that we necessarily get there in the end, but I mean, if you manage the income and do a lot of the things we're talking about, we can do both. But if we don't do both, it's not necessarily the end. I'm sort of maybe in between you guys in terms of we strive for fiscal responsibility, we want to get those votes, but sometimes it makes sense to borrow money and to invest and to build housing.
Thank you.
I probably have time for one or two more questions. His hands up a long, you just go over there.
Alright, so I have a lot of to think on everything everyone said, and I really interesting. But this room is also disproportionately sympathizers who are clearly politically engaged. So when it comes around to the time for a general election, we're really resonating with people who might not follow politics as closely but care as much. It's kind of a two-part question. It's a bit directed towards each of you. If we avoid adopting labels and maybe avoid entire issues as a whole, well, how will we inspire people then? How will they know what we stand for? Or how will they know that it's not just funny, political talk that they tune out? On the flip side, if we adopt these labels, once these conversations start happening in the public, how do we make sure we're not misconstrued as something that we're not? We're just really open to attacks based on people's fears about labels they don't entirely understand. So I understand. So what I would love to know your thoughts on that perspective thing.
I think that we as Greens across the country need to engage in some self-reflection about how we're perceived by the progressive community, because I don't think we necessarily understand how we're perceived by the progressive community. What I hear more, I have friends right across the left and the center left of the political spectrum. Many of them are, lifelong supporters of the Taxation. Is a very good friend of mine. I got a lot of respect for Sven Robinson. There are a lot of people who are completely opposed to the whole idea of electoral politics. They think it's hopelessly corrupt. But the values are aligned with mine. And what I'm hearing from them over and over again, one thing I keep hearing is that the Green Party is a fundamentally conservative party with a social conscience, that it's right-wing and has a social conscience, that it's a one-trick pony, that it's fundamentally neoliberal, that it's anti-labor. I hear that a lot. And I have to say that based upon the historical performance of this party and the policies that it has adopted, I have to be honest, I think it's not without some justification that these things are said. What we really need to be doing is embracing organized labor, championing organized labor. We need to help stop talking about this stuff about fiscal responsibility and actually begin to dissect what fiscal responsibility really means. We need to be a much more anti-imperialist party. It's very troubling to me, I must say, that I've been now in 2 events here in 2 days. I haven't heard a single question about foreign policy. It's very concerning to me. Foreign policy, we don't live in a bubble. We don't live in an island. Everything that happens around this world, one way or another, will come home to roost. And what we do here has effects upon people outside of this country. And your value as a human being is not determined by your passport, your nationality, or ethnicity. The lives of people who are non-Canadian matter just as much as our own lives. And so we need to become more sensitive to issues of foreign policy. You know, we need to become more vigorous in our critique about the hegemonic foreign policy of the United States, and the fact that our government falls so readily in line with whatever the United States government wants, even when a lunatic like Trump is in charge. If we start doing those things, I think you're going to see a huge inrush of people from the progressive community, people who completely abandoned the electoral system into the Green Party of Canada. And that's what I'm here to run for. I mean, that's ultimately what my campaign's going to be all about.
That's a really great question, because it goes to this core issue: how do we draw people into our party, and do we frame ourselves as appealing to, you know, the NDP and people who aren't voting because they feel that there's no hope to change the capitalist system, or do we appeal much more broadly? And it is the core difference between Dimitri and I, because I really do believe that most Canadians' votes are not going to be mobilized around our foreign policy. They're not going to be mobilized around, you know, gun control, although many conservatives' votes are. I think the way to really mobilize people, and you see it in the streets, you see it in the demonstrations in Montreal, you see it on the front steps of the legislature in Victoria, is around this issue, this existential issue. And we have 8 to 10 years before climate change is irreversible. And what we need to do, in my view, is tie in our key policy platforms to that. And I do see guaranteed livable income, and I do see free tuition and the just transition off fossil fuels as being closely related to that. I agree that we can't give up on our core values around peace, diversity, you know, human rights. These are also core issues, and it's tricky because those are very, very important, but I don't see them as mobilizing voters as much as, you know, well, what's in it for me? Unfortunately, so many voters think that way. What's going to happen to my student loans? Is you know, what's going to happen to my kids and grandkids in terms of climate action? And I think we need to appeal to people on things that they see as their real concerns. And I respect these other issues as being important issues, and especially for those of us who love politics and policy, we love to get into this stuff. But we also need to be really smart about what motivates voters. And I think the Green Party hasn't quite got there in terms of connecting with voters on things that really matter to them. And they want to see us not being extremists. They want to see us as being rational, focused, disciplined, united, and an effective political force. And that's what I'm campaigning on.
I think we're all surrounded by our own bubble to some extent. Like, you're around left-wing people, you're around more moderate people, but we got to realize, you know, that the majority of people are not the people that we talk to every day. And we got to appeal to them, we got to talk in language they understand, we got to inspire them, listen to their desires, and to give them voice, to give them real democracy, direct democracy, and to get the people who don't vote out. You got to do something different. It'll be fun, and you got to be in the media. You know, like rapist Trump got elected because he was in the media every day, and because he was entertaining, and he was stupid. And we have to, like, I love Gore, you know, and you know, Kerry wasn't bad, but they spoke in 2 big words. You know, I met Trump supporters in the States who you know, say, you know, why do you vote for Trump? Well, I can understand what he says. I listen to the Democrats, I don't understand anything. We have to speak in words people understand, and we can't get too caught up in our own little bubbles, and we have to be entertaining, unfortunately, you know, and we have to use social media. There's the regular media, which we have to, you know, do stupid things sometimes to get on, and there's also the social media, and we have to be very active in that as well. We have to, because most people, you know, I met somebody in a health food store yesterday, and they're like, what's the Green Party? And he worked in the health food store. And it's like, well, have you ever heard of the Liberal Party? Have you heard of the Conservative Party? I mean, I didn't say it like that, because that's the last thing you want to do. You don't want to be, you know, talk down to them. But that's the reality. That a lot of people don't know who the Green Party is, never heard of us. There was a poll in the 80s saying, you know, would you vote for a Green Party if one existed? Well, we did exist, but that wasn't mentioned in the article. And over 50% of the people said they would vote for us, possibly. So we have to get in people's faces, and jump up and down, and give them gifts.
If we're going to be kicked out of this room now because it is past 9. First off, I want to thank all of you guys for coming. It was awesome to have this exchange of ideas. It's really important to the upcoming race. I want to thank everyone in the audience for coming. It was awesome.